Well, hello again. If you don't know me, I'm Jim Killam. I'm part of the Wycliffe Global Alliance communication team. And one of the things that we are working on this year is gradually building a course in story reporting, story gathering, story publishing, and some of the different facets of it. And one of the things that our Curiosity Club group indicated that is a priority is how to choose the right format for the story you are trying to tell. And we have a lot of options now. So I'll show you here my title slide, which is, by the way, that's a Chat GPT image created in about 30 seconds. So if you're using Chat GPT for creating things, you got to tell people that's what it is. But it's getting better and better by the week. So kind of fun to try with that. So the subtitle here under telling the story is choosing the right format for field stories, or if you prefer, planning, gathering, and organizing information that best serves your audience. That sounds more corporate, I guess, doesn't it? So whatever however you prefer to think of the title. We have lots of stories in front of us, and sometimes it's a matter of just how do we organize it all. So here's some things we need to be able to do well, and this is going to kind of be the framework for what we talk about today. We need to be able to plan a story gathering trip or interview and have a clear purpose for that and know what our audience is. We need to know how to gather raw material, strong raw material. And that, again, whether you're working remotely or on a trip to a site someplace, you've got to develop that ability to gather strong material. Then you got to organize it all. And you've got notes, quotes, interviews, videos, audio, whatever, photos into what we're going to call a clear story spine. And I'll get back to that term. And then last, and this is where the title comes from, we're going to choose the format that best serves your audience, the story, and resources. But there's steps that happen before that, and I think we'll spend a little time on those first three steps just because this all works together. So back to the picture of the person at their desk. How do I turn all this raw material into something that connects with our audience? You may come back from a story trip or even several remote interviews and have just a pile of information or a pile of photos and videos. And it's a bit mind-boggling. And the other thing that's mind-boggling now, you ever see a one-man band? This is back from probably the turn of the 20th century, but it was these people that would have this crazy contraption that they wore where they would play every instrument themselves. And that's what journalism looks like today. It used to be that when you'd have a story trip, and sometimes this still happens, but there'd be a specialist for video, there'd be a specialist for maybe audio or even lighting or something like that. And then you'd have a specialist who would be shooting pictures and another one who would be writing a story. That does still happen, but more often than not, and especially with our organizations, I think, and I've experienced this, is that you have to do everything yourself. And that is interesting and fun, but also a bit overwhelming because your attention goes in many directions as you're trying to gather a story. And so I kind of find this to be pretty indicative of what life is like in journalism right now is you are doing everything. So let's talk about choosing the right format. And there's so many choices, often so little time. So you get back from a project visit, or maybe you've done a remote interview and you have all these things. You have maybe a written story, maybe you have a video, a photo essay, a podcast. Do I do all this stuff? Do I do one of these things? How do I organize it all, and what's the best way to choose? And again, that box at the bottom, just because you collected lots of raw information doesn't mean you need to use it all. You have given yourself options when you've collected a lot of things, so it's a great thing. But I fall into that trap sometimes of feeling like, well, I shot this video, I absolutely have to use it. And maybe that's not the best way to tell that story. So then we start to look at how do we tell that story. So here's the next one. I mentioned these steps already: plan, gather, organize, choose. And this is a good framework to follow when you are working a story. And that is, I mentioned that maybe if you feel stuck on one step, it could mean that you didn't pay enough attention to the previous step. It works the same way with writer's block, by the way. If you ever have writer's block, it's not because you can't write, it's because probably you don't have enough information or you didn't do enough interviews or whatever that might look like. But you kind of look at the previous step to say, did I fill everything in? So again, those steps, and we'll take a quick look at these. Plan before you go or before you call. And you want to know what's the purpose of the story. And the story can change, of course, but you want to go in with a plan. And maybe it's to recruit members to your organization. Maybe it's to inform, inspire giving, celebrate. There could be all different things. Who's the audience? And you can answer that much better than I can here, but there are some potentials listed there. But and don't just say everybody, even though there may be a wide audience, but you've got to narrow it in to who is your primary audience on this story, because that's going to help you craft the story and how you tell it. And then one short key message this story needs to carry. I'll talk about that more in a second. And what format constraints do we already know? And that might be you have a really tight deadline, so maybe there isn't time to edit a video. Maybe you don't have access to a project and you only have a phone interview or a WhatsApp interview. Maybe you don't have the budget or the equipment or even the skills to do some of these steps. And so it may not be the best choice to do a video if you don't know how to edit video or you don't have the budget to hire somebody. So again, you're considering all those things as you decide what does this story look like. Gather is the next step. You want good usable material on-site. I'm not going to go through all these because this is stuff we've covered before and is in other videos that we've made, but you're just gathering everything you can. And at the point when you're gathering, you're not so much worried about does this fit the story. Generally, yes, but get everything you can, get more than you think you need. Ask permission and or explain how the story will be used. And we will talk another time probably about permissions and release forms and that kind of thing. And then with remote interviews, you're just giving it the same attention you would a live interview in terms of some of the extra stuff you're capturing. Maybe you're getting some photos to go with it or something, having that person send you photos, different things like that. But again, your overall goal here is you are gathering good, usable material in lots of forms. And then we get to organize, and this is a pretty interesting step here. And this is a really nice thing to do with any story you're working on is find the spine. And that could also be called the kernel or the central arc. But I've got 5 boxes showing here. And the quick test on this is, can you tell the story in 5 sentences? And you do one per box. So what's the setting? Who's the person? And sometimes there's more than one person, but generally a story is going to have one relatable, sympathetic main character sometimes, somebody that you can kind of attach yourself to as a reader or a viewer. And then what's the challenge or what's the obstacle? That's another word for that. But what is the problem? What has to be overcome for this story to play out? And then is there a turning point? What happens and what's the point when this story starts to resolve itself and why? And then the fifth one is the big one, and that is after all this stuff happens, what's the impact? Is there transformation? That's a huge word that we throw around a lot in Bible translation, but it's good for stories too. And that is what changed. And if there isn't yet transformation, because sometimes I know we're writing about projects that are just starting, or we're even doing videos about brand new projects. So what's the hope for that? What's the hope for impact or transformation based on what we know already? It is harder to do a story like this when everything is still in the future. But at least, again, these 5 points do help you figure out what is this story. Now, if you've been on a trip to a project, you might have five of these sets of boxes because you might have five different stories. But it's a good little pattern to practice and to just get in the habit of saying, this is how this story goes together. One, you start to realize how story works, and you start to, in your mind, build things even as you're reporting. But two, it's just a logical way to tell a story that will connect with your audience. Okay, let's go on to step four. And here now we're at choose the format that best serves the story. So again, we're back to audience. We're back to the resources we have to be able to tell it. This one called material, what's strongest? A face and a voice? Is it a compelling fact? Is it a quiet conversation? So, for example, on that one, let's say I'm putting something together on the latest Bible translation statistics, and it's just, hey, we've advanced, we have this many projects that started last month. Well, that's not going to be a face or a voice. That's a compelling fact. So that may be a text story because it's number related, right? So it'd be progress, Bible statistics, and things like that. So again, that's not a video. That's a written story usually, or even a chart. And then here's where we're gathering a lot of things under reuse. Can one trip supply more than one format if we plan for it up front? And that's the one-man band question again. Now, we have created something called a story brief, and this is going to take you through some of what I just talked about. So here's the story brief. This is editable, so you could take this and customize it for your own organization if you like, but it's a form to fill out for any story, and you start to just ask yourself questions that can help you get to some of the answers that we've just looked at. It's a little bit different language than what we just looked at, but again, so we start with what happened, and why does it matter? Those are the two main questions for any news story. When I used to work in newspapers, that's always the question is what happened and who cares, or what happened and so what. If you can answer those things, great, then you move on. If you can't, then you got to think, well, do I even have anything here? What makes this more than just an announcement? So is there attention or question? And then is it timely, important, and interesting? And those are kind of the definitions of news there. So that's a good start for this form, and just you fill those in. And then again, we talked about a central character or a sympathetic main character. So who's the human center of the story? Their name, their role, their relationship to the translation project. And here's the obstacle or the challenge. What do they want? What stands in their way? What's the obstacle? That's conflict, right? And that's the center point of any story is there's tension. There's something that's working against something else. And why will an outsider care? What makes them compelling to someone new to this story? So we move down the form. Who's the primary audience? Talked about that a little bit already, but that's where you'd fill that in. What do they already know? This is kind of important because if your audience knows nothing of Bible translation, then you have to go back and explain some things, don't you? And you may need some material that does that. Maybe it's statistics, maybe it's somebody giving an explanation. The desired response, this is a little tricky because I like to leave that to God sometimes, or all the time. But what do you think people should feel, think, or do after this story? I mean, if it's a funding pitch, then that's the way it's pointed. But if it's just to kind of relate the work of God and glorify God, then maybe that's, what your desired response is for that story. And then the share potential, and this is an alliance related question, but as we start sharing more and more stories as organizations, should this story be shared for a global audience and why? So we've built that into this too. And then platform and context is the next step. Where will this story live? It may be your website, but it may be all these other things too. again, just so you know, and this is going to start to help you nail down what should this story be, what format should it be in, and then are there series, themes, or events this connects to, related campaigns or stories? Okay, then you get to the really practical stuff here. What do you have? What are the assets in hand? If you've done a remote interview, you might have any of this stuff. I won't read it all, but you can see it. And maybe that's just a little checklist to say, what do we need and what do we have? And then on site, you'd have the stuff above, and then interviews, written observations, photos, video interview, B-roll, other, and then still needed. And that's where you would fill in, all right, we don't have any B-roll with this interview, for instance, so we need something to back up the video interview, or just fill in gaps there with that one. There's space for you to write on that. All right, moving on. Story format. What format does this brief point toward and why? And there's going to be some options below that you may have already gotten to, but I'll show you in a second. Is there a secondary format? Is there a way to repurpose this story for another platform? And then when does this story get published? And is there a target word count or runtime? And then finally, the pitch line. What's one sentence you would use to convince someone to invest their attention in this story? That's a really valuable tool as you're telling a story because it keeps you focused. Sometimes I'll come up with that pitch line and I'll put a sticky note on my computer or next to it. And then everything that I am including in the story has to pass the test. Does it contribute to that pitch line? Does it contribute to what is this story about and why should anyone care? So that's the stuff you're filling in. Then below that on the form, there's these resources, and I certainly won't read all this, but you guys can look through it. And there's a bunch of formats, and what you just filled out point toward? Is it a narrative feature, news article, photo essay, audio documentary? By the way, audio documentary sounds way less accessible than most of us have the ability to do. But I don't mean, a National Geographic style audio documentary. I just mean maybe it's a longer piece than the 2 to 5 minute thing. Podcast interview, that's more and more used. We're finding that that's a wonderful way to tell longer form stories and to just have a longer conversation with somebody than try to do that all in a print story. Or short video is another one. And then I'll move down the list here. There's social media threads, short form videos or reels. Maybe there's a newsletter story. Q&A is another nice way to do a interview story where it's just you and that other person and it's back and forth. Q&A is a nice format for that. Maybe an infographic, that'd be like the Bible translation statistics I mentioned. That if the story is numbers or the story is a map or something like that, then visually maybe that's the best way to tell it. And then maybe it's a hybrid. It may be several of these things or a combination of these things. In an example, there would be a photo story where you drop in audio clips with the photos or something. There's so many things you can do now that don't take a lot of expertise other than just a little bit of editing help and knowing where to find the right apps. So those are some of the things that you can build on, and you can decide what do I have and what's the best format to do that. So that's, again, I'm going to put a link to that on the communication page too, but you've got the Google Doc there. Okay, then back to the PowerPoint. So if you're still unsure after going through that whole process of filling out that form and deciding what is the best way to do this, or what's the best way to tell this story, here's some more questions you can ask. What's the strongest part of my material? Is it a face? Is it a voice? Is it a fact? Is it something else? If you're not sure, ask somebody else and have somebody review that and just say, what sticks in your mind? What's the best, strongest part of this? And how would I tell that best? Where will my audience actually see or hear this? Is it going to be your website? Is it going to be a newsletter? What's it going to look like? Is it a podcast? So again, that's going to help determine format because you're thinking audience, and that's the key question is if your audience doesn't consume it, then there's no point. And then the last one is what can I realistically produce with excellence by the deadline, whatever your deadline is. And I include that just because we could look at that whole list of potential story formats and think, oh, this is great. Yes, I want to do all of these. And you realize I don't have the ability to do all of these, and I don't have anybody to help me. And so that bottom box there, the best format is the one you can execute with excellence, not necessarily the most impressive one. So sometimes if all you've got is you and you're a good writer, but you don't do video or photo, then write a great story. It doesn't have to be a video if that's not what you're good at, and vice versa. I mean, if you're a great photographer but can't write, great. Do a photo story and get someone to take a look at your captions to make sure everything sounds all right. But really go with your strengths when you can. Okay, let's quickly review and then we'll get to some conversation here too. I'll throw the one-man band in there again because that's what a lot of us feel like on story trips these days. But again, those key steps, plan, gather, organize, and then choose. Don't jump right to the fourth one. Choose before you've done the other ones because you'll find yourself frustrated and you won't have enough in mind to be able to make a good choice on what the format is. Okay, that is what I wanted to get through, but I would love to hear from some of you on questions, comments, maybe experiences you've had in choosing some of these formats and even mistakes you've made, because we've all made plenty of mistakes on producing stories.
So I'll just offer maybe a reflection from experience about a shocking number of years ago now. When I worked for Wycliffe UK, I did a trip to Nigeria to gather stories. And it was a really good trip that I gathered lots of material. But because I didn't have a plan or the wisdom at that point to narrow it down to the most important thing, I kind of drowned under the quantity of material that I brought back. I had videos of interviews, I had photographs from loads of different places, I had notes of lots of different stories. And as a result, it was really, really difficult to narrow it down to one or two things that I could put out. I wonder, Jim, if you've got any experience on being in that kind of situation.
Yeah, lots. Especially again, if you go and you're not, and I'm not saying this happened to you, Phil, but if you go unfocused, like I have no idea what the story is or is going to be, and I'm just going to gather everything I can. Well, you do want to gather everything you can, but if before a trip, especially, if you can establish contact with some of the people on the site where you're going and at least get a decent idea of where the story is headed and who you might need to talk to, that gives you a running start. And when you get to the site, you're not, and I've had this happen where I got to a site and we had no idea what we were supposed to be gathering in Russia, of all places. And that trip ended up being kind of a disaster because the person we were supposed to meet didn't show up, and we were just there and wondering what do we gather. So we gathered everything we could, and we ended up not using a lot of it because it was just widely scattered in topic. So if you can go in, let's say you're going to a Bible translation site where it's a community that's oral community or oral communicators, well, you already know that you've got that to focus on. And then you start to say, okay, who are some of the people leading this project? And more importantly, who's being impacted by this project? Or who do you anticipate is going to be impacted by this project? And you find those folks. And that's the point where you would say, all right, we've got this one lady who is sort of spearheading this project. Well, let's get a video interview of her. Let's get pictures. Let's do a long form, sort of a podcast type of a thing. Then you've got a lot of material, but it's still focused on the central point of your story. And when you get back, it's not so overwhelming, like you've got a library with all the books on the floor, because everything is focused on that one person. And then you can go back and decide, all right, what's the best way to tell this? And I've got some options. But yeah, Phil, I've had more experiences than I could count where I just gathered everything I could, and you get back and you think, what am I going to do with all this?
Do you have a question, not a story?
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm thinking if you have a plan and it's in your mind how you want to communicate the story, get down to the field and you find another side of the story that you think is quite pertinent. This time it's not like you have too much information and you're struggling on how to organize, but you have these two aspects.
we're losing you, Isaac. I think I got the question though. So the question is, what happens when plans change? When you think you have one story, you get to the field and that person is not available, or you find something that you didn't know about that, oh, this is way better. I might gather the original thing if I still can, but I'm certainly not so locked into that plan that I can't also gather what I find to be better. I mean, that's part of the skill of being a journalist, is that you think on your feet and that you recognize good stories. And once you do recognize a good story that you didn't know about prior, that's maybe when you organize yourself again to say, all right, now I've got this. Let me go through that checklist again and say, what do I need to tell that one? And you do have to do that on the fly on the field sometime, even though that's less comfortable than having arrived with a huge plan. But it's also fun. When you find something unexpected and it's great, that's part of the fun of this work. So you can use everything I presented today. You just have to do it fast, and in a remote setting rather than, weeks in advance or something. It's a great thing when new stories crop up. Don't consider that an inconvenience or an annoyance. It's wonderful, because you're getting exposed to the work of God in a new way, and your audience gets to experience it too.
One thing that I would be interested in the experience of other people is if we're gathering all this material, without yet deciding what the format is we're going to use it in at the end, particularly with video, I think social media framing would be different from traditional video framing. How, if we're going to gather material and potentially have it available for both formats, any experience on how we gather video material that can be used for a traditional, I was going to say traditional YouTube video, traditional standard definition kind of landscape video, and one that we may also want to use for portrait?
Yeah, I see Kathy's on the call. Kathy may have insight or two on this. My approach is always to shoot horizontally as if it was going to be a full video, and then maybe shoot it so it could be cropped in as necessary. Hi, Kathy.
Hello, everyone. I agree with Jim. It's always safe to shoot on a landscape mode because one advantage of shooting using a landscape mode, you can do different shots or edit it into different shot. Like if you want a full shot, close up shot, or medium shot to add variation in telling your story, because sometimes if it's just one frame with the same shot, like if you only use medium shot the whole time you're telling the story, sometimes you lose your audience with that, so you use different kinds of shot in telling your story. Also in visual storytelling, it's important that you get not just the face. Sometimes the hands communicate something. So it's always safe to have a shot like that and shoot it in a high resolution format, so that when you crop things or when you do different shot, the resolution is still good. And then maybe additional input on video storytelling. Sometimes it's best to shoot B-rolls, like places or activities done in that location, because there are times that when you want to write a story or you're making a story, you'll think of something that you need to use to support your story. And there are also instances in my experience, I shoot an interview. The rest are good. I thought the rest was a good shot, but there are instances when, the lighting changes, especially when it is done outside, and you have a good interview, but the face of the your the person you're being interviewed suddenly change color, and you don't know what to do, but it has a good message in it. So that's the time I use b-roll to cover, those instances where you want to keep the audio, just like what you shared, Jim. The audio is really good, but there are instances that the videos are not quite good. So you replace it with B-rolls, like supplementary photos or short clips from the place where you got the interview.
Yeah, that's great, Kathy. Thanks. As you were talking about that, I was thinking, don't ever feel bad about making a shot list and carrying a long list of things you need to get. This will come automatically and more instinctively as you get more experienced at it. But even when you are, make a list and keep adding to that list and then check things off as you have them. And it's going to help you not get back from a trip and realize, oh, I didn't get the family eating dinner. And they talk about eating dinner together through the whole interview. Or, you just need things and you'll add to that list on site as you learn more about it. The other thing that came to mind as you were talking was I had a college photojournalism professor who said film is your cheapest commodity. And what he meant is shoot as much as you possibly can on site because it's going to cost a whole lot more to go back and get what you need if you forgot it, or it's going to cost a lot more in the quality of your story to not have it. So don't worry about filling card after card after card with photos and videos. Even if you're not going to need them, it is a wonderful thing to have too much material because you're not frustrated because, oh, I didn't get this, or oh, I was too cheap and I decided I didn't want to use up a whole other card on this shot list. So, yeah, gather everything you can again with some focus. But even again, as you build experience, you'll realize, like Kathy said, sometimes you want to get hands, or sometimes you want to get, very tight shots, or you need to just even get establishing shots with a video that show the location almost from a drone's eye view or something, a big mix of those. And yeah, you should come back with a pile of material at your disposal. Thanks, Kathy. That was great. Anything else?
I have a question
Yeah,
about
Karen.
videos. We're currently doing a video on the life of someone who is 80 something years old and has progressed as a translator and now as a consultant and all that. So we're deciding the length of that video, like the final outcome. And the people who are involved in it, they've been in advertising and all that, and they've been telling us that the video length, they still think it should not be more than like 4 minutes to 8 minutes. 8 minutes is pushing it according to them, but of course it depends on the interview. But when we initially thought of doing this interview, we thought, oh, we should capture this person's insights and all that. And how are you going to capture that in 4 minutes or 8 minutes? So I don't know what are people's views on this?
Well, that is the eternal question, isn't it? Is how do I cram somebody's life story into 4 minutes or 8 minutes? And it's frustrating. One thought would be have several versions of the story that you produce. One could be the short, 1 minute to 2 minute clip if somebody may need to just a social media version of it or something. Maybe you have a longer one. Maybe you have a 10-minute one that somebody may want, and that you could offer. And if you offer those as a package, or offer them to different audiences in different spots. There again, you've got the long interview. It's just cutting it up in different ways depending on your audience. Others may have better thoughts than that. This is me, a writer, telling you how to make a video, so don't put too
I,
much stock in it.
I can answer with a story.
Yeah.
There was a Wycliffe UK member or founding member called John Bender Samuel, who towards the end of his career took part in an interview with Jars, which got recorded, and it ended up on 3 DVDs. That was how long the interview ran for. So what's that? 2.5 hours, something like that, of material. Other than his family, I don't know anybody that has watched the whole thing. And this guy was wonderful. So, Karen, my instinct would be to say make the most of the interview and record as much material as you can, because you may never get the opportunity to interview this person again. So take that and do a 2.5 hour interview. But if you want people to watch it, listen to the people that are telling you about the audience, because it would be a real shame to have 4 hours worth of material that nobody ever watches. Whereas you may have, I don't know, 10 1-minute interviews that are wonderful, that reach hundreds or thousands of people.
That thought, Phil, leads us to another one, and that's archiving stuff. When you come back from a trip, or when you've gathered, a lot on a story and you use a little of it, don't throw the rest away. You don't know when you may need the rest of that. So again, the long interview on video or audio, maybe don't use it right away, but maybe that person dies in 5 years or something, and this is the definitive interview that's been done with that person. You may want the whole thing then. So I know it's a storage issue, and it's keeping track of where things are, but those are great things to keep.
Yeah. With that as well, it brings to mind two things. Back when I worked for Wycliffe UK, we had a few members that died while they were in service of Wycliffe UK, and they were high profile enough that the news media were asking about those people. The more information that you have in the background, then the less you need to approach that member's family to ask it, a time of grief for more information. I know, Ramona, that you've just got a new director at Wycliffe, Germany. One of the best things that you can do is get some biographical information and photographs that the family are happy with. Because if they go, it's a big PR thing, then it saves you the issue of trying to solve a problem where everybody's dealing with grief. And so that's just one thing on kind of capturing that kind of information. The other thing, Karen, that it strikes me in particularly with older members is that they love to tell the story of how things used to be. And we have to be careful when we present it that it doesn't come across in the way that this is how things happen now, because the history of Bible translation is littered with lots of well-intentioned Western people going to do things to other communities. And the reality of the story now is very different, which is wonderful and really good. But we have to pay attention when we present the material that we either say, this is my story, or this is how we used to do things. Maybe even to have a narrator that can help an audience with that journey. But to be able to, at least within that, give the sense that it was a really good thing at a particular time, but the world has moved on maybe since then. So there's things like that to pay attention to. Sorry, that was a bit off topic, but just while you raised the subject.
I could ask a question. I'm Sarah from Wycliffe, India.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi. So we have been working on a project recently and which captures 21 translation teams that have recently completed the New Testament. And while collecting data from each of the teams, we use a structured format. And so what happens when we produce those stories, they tend to seem very repetitive in the way they sound because they go as per a certain format. I was just wondering if audiences, so if it's compiled in one particular, in a book, would audiences want to read something like that, or say 21 stories that kind of seem similar because we wanted to capture everything right from the start to the end?
That's a great question, and that's something that comes up a lot. I used to work at the seed company, and we would get these quarterly reports from projects, and they would all fill in the blanks. And so they all did sound fairly similar. And then it's how do we make this all sound different? Some of you may have better thoughts than I do on this. My initial thought would be keep those stories brief if they all sound the same and look for distinguishing factors. So if there's something that does set that story apart, open with that or lead with that, so that you don't have 10 stories that sound the very same. That's easier said than done sometimes. But yeah, I identify with that sameness question because that is an issue when so much of our work, so many of our projects look very similar, don't they? Depending on the region you're in. But
Right.
and if they're all at the same stage, it's even worse because then you're talking about the same processes each time. The other thing is if you can get your reports like that to focus on impact and transformation rather than process, that will make things unique too, because every story is different. And, if we're talking about the consulting process, that's important, but it's not usually the most interesting thing going on, people checking scripture. But if you can then go and say, well, here's who received it, here's what they did with it, here's what their life looks like now, as opposed to what it looked like before. And sometimes that's training your field people to look for that stuff because what they're filling in is the stuff that's in the front of their mind, and that's the process stuff, right? That's the consulting and the drafting, and that's where it all begins to sound the same because you're speaking the language of translators rather than regular people or even journalists. And if you
Right.
can get to where you're telling good stories of regular people getting impacted by all this, I think that maybe makes a difference.
Right. Thank you for that. So it would make sense to have a version where there are different storylines, but also then keep all the information for the organizational records.
Yeah, and I'd say if your field people are filling out forms, and that's how you're getting your information, then take a close look at your forms and see, are you asking the right questions? Are you asking for transformation type stories, or is it all process oriented? I'm sure you're getting some good stuff, but you kind of do have to train them in what you're looking for.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Jim.
Mhm. It does help us to know if these sessions are landing well with you guys. So if you would just send us a quick note to Wycliffe or to info@wycliffe.net, just constructive criticism for sure, sessions you would like to see. What haven't we covered that would be really helpful to you? And I know we ask this from time to time, but after these sessions is a good time to kind of reflect on things like that and say, is this working? Where are we missing it? And what's helpful? So we're not fishing for compliments here. We're really looking for how do we serve you guys better?
I'll be honest, Jim, we're talking to a screen, so actually a compliment doesn't hurt from time to time.
Yeah, I never know if I'm making contact with anybody or not. I see you looking at your cameras, but it's not eye contact.
It's even worse when you've got a presentation up on the screen, so everybody's faces are even smaller, and
Yeah.
you can tell quite whether people are hearing it. If you have any other comments or questions, please feel free to email me. Other than that, thank you all for being around for this Curiosity Club, and thank you, Jim, very much for presenting on this. I know that the story spine idea is going to be a really useful tool for many people, and the checklist as well.